Good morning, everybody. We're here to talk about truth today. As you know, the LA 101 classes are focused on the three transcendentals and a couple of virtues. The transcendentals being truth, goodness, and beauty. And for the entire history of the Western world, these have been among the highest ideals that have been sought by people important and supposedly less important. All of us need to seek for these things, and they're among the most important things you will ever try to achieve, and they're going to be mysterious in the end as well. So you're going to have talks this semester on truth, goodness, beauty, courage, and justice. And we begin with truth because it usually is listed first. And you see these three transcendentals on the Carson-Newman University seal. Truth, goodness, and beauty. So today we're going to talk about truth, a passionate and relentless eternal quest. Because it is eternal because we never totally understand truth. We never finally have our understanding of the total truth because we're finite and we are fallen. However, we do believe that truth is real, that we are simply not just making things up, and that truth is very important and bad things happen when the truth is ignored. And so what I want to talk about here today are three different stories. And these three stories have something in common. And you'll see what that common piece is. One is a very current story, the other two are quite ancient. So let's begin with the first story about a tragedy in 1986. In 1986 in January, and there was an engineer at the Morton Thiokol Company named Roger Boisjoli. And Roger Boisjoli tried his best to get the attention of his superiors. Boisjoli was involved in the creation of the solid rocket boosters for the space shuttle. He especially was familiar with the material used to create the O-ring seals in that solid rocket booster. And he knew better than anyone that it had been too cold in Cape Canaveral, Florida, the last few days before the launch of the shuttle in January '86, for that material that provided the seal for the fuel in that solid rocket booster. He knew that it could not withstand those sub-freezing temperatures. It had gotten down to like 20 degrees in Florida the days preceding the launch and the day of the launch. So he contacted his superiors at Morton Thiokol. He called management and said, "Managers, please call NASA and tell them this is dangerous. This O-ring material cannot withstand the cold." And he was ignored by his superiors. And his superiors, as was discovered later, they were afraid of Morton Thiokol getting a black eye with their main customer. If they were to cause a launch to be scrubbed, then that would be very bad for their business because NASA was their primary contractor. And so they did not communicate to NASA. Boisjoli, at great professional risk, decided to try to find his own way to talk to NASA. And if you ever worked in a chain of command, this is a big no-no. You're not supposed to go over your boss's heads and do their job. All of that failed. He couldn't get anybody's attention in a position to make a difference and express his dire concern about these O-rings. The countdown continued. His friends tried to persuade him to come on over as usual to the video room where they always watched the launch. And so this morning they were gathered. Boisjoli resisted even going to watch the launch because of the dread that he felt. Eventually he relented and walked to the door of the room where they were showing the video of the launch countdown, leaned up against the door. He and a friend of his who shared his concern were talking. And they said a silent prayer of thanks as the vehicle left the launch pad because they were afraid it was going to blow up as soon as it was ignited.
It was a bitter cold but sparkling clear morning at Cape Canaveral. Here at the last seconds of the countdown.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
All the communications between the shuttle and mission control indicated everything was going fine. There was a sense of relief that the much-delayed flight was finally underway.
Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs. Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
It happened just over 1 minute into flight.
velocity 2,900 feet per second, altitude 9 nautical miles, downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
From Mission Control, silence. Then the bland, chilling report.
We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded. Flight director confirms that. We are looking at checking with the recovery forces to see what can be done at this point.
A little over a minute into the flight, as you saw, the space shuttle exploded and fell in pieces back into the ocean. On the slow motion replay that you can also see, you can see where the explosion started. It was at the base of the solid rocket boosters where the O-ring seal had failed. In this tragedy that killed 7 astronauts, including the first teacher in space. Famed physicist Richard Feynman was the chief scientist on the commission. This is Dr. Feynman as the commission presented its findings, and he himself broke protocol. Dr. Feynman broke protocol too, because he was not supposed to be the one talking directly to the engineers at Morton Thiokol, but he did. He went himself and located the engineers who knew the most, and that included Roger Boisjoli. What he determined was that this O-ring material looked and felt like rubber at room temperature. And so Dr. Feynman here before this scene, he got a piece of the same material that looked like a gasket, he squeezed it back and forth, and it was flexible like a rubber gasket would be. Then he put a C-clamp on it to close it down and kind of mash it against itself, and then put it in his glass of ice water. Then he gave his findings, which he almost was not allowed to give. The commission tried hard to talk him out of even including his findings in the report, and he threatened to resign the commission if they didn't let him say what he had found. So he gave his report, and after he finished talking, he pulled this rubber gasket back out of the ice water, removed the clamp from it, and it did not re-expand to the original shape as it had at room temperature. This was a visually effective demonstration that this is not just plain rubber. This material was designed to expand, and if it didn't expand, it would not work. And so Dr. Feynman showed this to be the case and very dramatically illustrated his point with his demonstration there. Those people died because those in attempting to protect their position, the people in power attempting to protect their position and their reputations, either would not or could not see the truth that the scientists most closely involved did see. And Krista McAuliffe perished in that explosion. She was the first teacher astronaut, never quite made it into space. The same story happened in a different set of circumstances in Athens in the 5th century BC. Athens was at the time the world's superpower, the richest, most culturally advanced, the most politically powerful, militarily powerful, largest of the city-states of the Mediterranean world. One of the most prominent citizens, Socrates, depicted here in this statue, saw that horrible things were about to happen to Athens if she did not change her corrupt ways. Athens had become very large and very corrupt. There were people who were using the tools of democracy to further their own personal ends and pay no attention to the well-being of the city as a whole. So the city-state, the nation, began to decline because people were inside, were competing with each other for the riches that the state had. And this was encouraged by competing states, and Athens eventually began to fall apart from inside to where they lost a major war and ended up being a servant state to the despised neighbors Sparta. Socrates, for 40 years, tried to warn of this horrible outcome. So at great personal risk, he tried to show those in power the dangerous political, military explosion, if you will, that was about to take place. Those in power saw him as a great risk to their positions and their reputations. And so They accused him of blasphemy, which is disrespecting the gods, and of corrupting the youth of Athens by having them question. He had the youth of Athens question their own parents and their own leaders when they were hypocritically claiming to be working for the state, but were working for themselves. And as you are aware, he did not turn out well for Socrates. He was convicted of those two charges, eventually sentenced to die. And this is a picture from Jacques-Louis David from the 18th century depicting the final moments of Socrates' life. He was highly regarded, highly respected by his inner circle and by their circle, but he was not respected by those in positions of power. The truth that he had to speak, either they could not or would not hear it. And they put to death the messenger of what we now know was the truth about Athens at the time. When he was drinking the draught of poison, that was the method of execution in ancient Athens, his friends were gathered around him, and they began to weep bitterly when they saw that he had finished the cup of poison. He asked them to not be so embarrassingly loud. He said, "A man should die in peace. Have patience, please." And they said, when we heard him, we withheld our tears and let him die, let him go in peace. When he had gone numb, he had said that when the poison reaches the heart, that will be the end. He said, "I have one last request. I owe a rooster to the god Asclepius. Would you be sure the debt is paid?" And Socrates, they told him, "Yes, the debt will be paid. Is there anything else?" Well, there was no answer to that last question. And then Crito then uncovered him again and noticed then that his eyes were set. And so Crito closed his eyes and his mouth. And the writer says that such was the end, dear reader, of our friend, who of all the men of my time who I have known, he was the wisest and the justest and the best. So what was that thing about the rooster? Well, it was a tradition in ancient Greece that when you were healed from a serious illness, that you would make a sacrifice of a rooster to the god of healing, Asclepius. And so this is what Socrates was requesting as he peacefully and calmly went to his death. A third story, one with which all of you are probably much more familiar than you would have been with the first two stories. About 430 years after what happened to Socrates, a prophet in Israel tried to warn those in power that their corruption would lead to disaster. Jesus, in an episode recorded in all four Gospels, is incensed at what's happening in the temple that should be a house of prayer. And as he drives out the money changers and those corrupt people who were using God's poor people for their own gain and their own enrichment, Jesus yells, "My temple should be a house of prayer, but you have turned it into a den of thieves." So then what happened to him right after this, after he upset the temple? Well, the people in positions of power, attempting to protect their positions and reputations, accused him of blasphemy, of disrespecting God, and they put him on trial. And he went to his own death, choosing that route rather than not speaking his truth. Speaking truth to power is dangerous, but that's what prophets do. Roger Boisjoli tried to be a prophet. He was ignored. Socrates was a prophet. He spoke truth to power. He was not ignored. He was killed. Jesus spoke truth to power. He was not ignored. He was killed. So as you can see in those three stories, speaking truth to power is dangerous. But why is it that we revere and remember Jesus's and Socrates' commitment to truth? We don't remember fondly those who squelched their truth, those who put them to death. They're now history's bad people. Well, because Jesus and Socrates were willing to give themselves. They were willing to stand up for their truth and even give their lives in service of that truth. They were not willing, however, to take the role of those who oppress them and put others down and destroy others for that truth. Why is it then that that's why these two prophets have given shape to Western civilization? It's not because they raised armies and forced others to accept their truth. It's not because they called down the wrath of God on the unholy and wiped them out. Because they won high-stakes debates in public forums? No. They lost their public debates. They didn't have the right zinger, gotcha line at the right time. But they gave themselves. They were willing to sacrifice themselves for the truth they knew. They were not going to sacrifice others. In other words, they laid down their lives for their friends. Unlike one of Socrates' young contemporaries, Euthyphro, he was very sure he knew exactly what justice was and had the full understanding of it, and was ready to have his own father tried and convicted of murder and executed. Socrates actually argued with him and showed him he didn't know what he was talking about, making him angry again, which is another thing Socrates did. But Euthyphro stands out because he was not willing to sacrifice himself for justice. He was willing to sacrifice his own father. And that is a very different approach. Some of Jesus' followers were ready to take up the sword when Jesus was arrested. One of them took out the sword and tried to chop the servant of the chief priest in half and knocked his ear off. And Jesus says, "Put away your sword. My kingdom is not of this world." And then he restored the ear. Put away your swords. From Isaiah 2:4, talking about God. He shall judge between the nations and shall arbitrate for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Bad things happen when the truth is ignored or suppressed. Challenger exploded and killed everybody on board. Athens fell from greatness and lost an epic war to the Spartans. It would never regain its glory. Within a generation of Jesus, Jerusalem was sacked by the Romans and the temple destroyed. Today, Ukraine is being devastated, supported by Vladimir Putin's lie that he is destroying Nazis in that country. Putin's domestic approval rating is about 83% because he controls the press in that country and has convinced most of his people that it is Nazis running Ukraine and they must be squelched. It's a lie. And this is what he's accomplishing among the devastations in that country on a lie. Bad things will happen if these truths are not acknowledged by enough people. And that's where this is contemporary. Bad things will happen if we continue to believe, like some people do, that cell phone towers are spreading COVID-19. Yes, people believe that. And they were sabotaging cell phone towers in England and other places because of this belief that cell phone towers were transmitting COVID-19 virus. So cell phones do not transmit viruses. Hillary Clinton did not traffic children through a DC pizza shop. This is one of the founding lies of QAnon. And somebody believed this enough to where they went into that store with a machine gun, ready to mow down the child traffickers. Fortunately, no one was injured and that person was arrested. But he was going to cut off the child trafficking business that was in the basement of that pizza shop, even though in reality there was not even a basement in the pizza shop. The root cause of the U.S. Civil War, in fact, was slavery. I was raised to think something different. I have learned that I was misled. Donald Trump lost the 2020 presidential election. There was not voter fraud sufficient in any state to change the outcome. And this is a particularly dangerous lie that way too many people in this nation actually believe when not a shred of evidence has been presented to any court of law in the hundreds of lawsuits filed. Not a shred of evidence has convinced any Secretary of State who ran an election, both Republican and Democrat, that there was any significant fraud in that election. But yet, 30 to 40% of the American people believe there was. I am deeply convinced that all these things are true and many more besides. Yes, we did land on the moon in 1969 and 1970, and other things people doubt. But I will listen to you if you have evidence to the contrary, because I could be wrong. There are more things in heaven and earth, however, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. From Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 5. I always know there's more that I don't know. And the more I learn, the more I realize how little I know. And so because there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in my philosophy, I will be committed to continue to listen. Can we talk? Can we listen? If not, we create a hell that will be hard to escape. Let us humbly seek the truth and humbly seek to align our own lives with what we find to be most true in the universe, and may we find ourselves moving ever more toward the center of God's will for our lives. God bless you. Godspeed.